how to fix it. Since we're starting the tail end of the final season of Supergirl this week, I felt it was only appropriate that we should take a look at the first time that the adventures of Kara Zor-El were adapted into live action. After the success of the first two Superman films, the Salkinds, Alexander and Ilya, who had also acquired the rights to Supergirl, intended to introduce the character of Supergirl in the third film, but ultimately decided not to. After the abysmal box office performance of Superman 3, the Salkinds instead opted to use Supergirl to revitalize the franchise. It was supposed to feature Supergirl coming to Earth and rescuing Superman, with the last son of Krypton becoming her mentor. Unfortunately, Christopher Reeve declined to appear in the film, so it had to be heavily rewritten, and while they did try to get Richard Lester, who directed half of Superman 2 and Superman 3, or Robert Wise, who did Star Trek the Motion Picture, and as a commenter on my review of that film once pointed out, is a brilliant director because he edited Citizen Kane, but they were unable to secure either of them and instead went with Jeannot Swark, who is more well known as a director for TV, though he did direct the films Jaws 2 and Somewhere in Time, and was chosen on the recommendation from the star of the latter film, Christopher Reeve. With all those factors coming together, the movie was eventually made and released in 1984, and, well, how do I put this? There's a term I like to use for films like this: a nonsensical pile of horseshit. I watched the film last year, and I knew that I was going to make a video on it eventually, but why did it take me this long to actually sit down and make the video? Well, the answer is simple. It took me the whole year to figure out what the hell that I'd watched. Anyway, I think it'd probably be best if we just get right into the review. This is Supergirl. The film opens up in Argos City, a Kryptonian city saved from destruction by being shunted into a vague pocket dimension where Kara Zor-El, played by Helen Slater, is mystified by, well, pretty much everything, since she walks around with her eyes wide and mouth agape for pretty much the entire movie, even though her emotional expression screams, "No surprise!" And to be clear, this is not a dig against Helen Slater, because I know she can act from having seen her in the Supergirl TV show, but this was her first major role, and the movie doesn't do her acting ability any favors. She wanders around and runs into Zoltar, played by Peter O'Toole, who is a great artist who uses his tool to create things like trees. They discuss the situation of where they are.
Saturn and Earth are in outer space, but we are in inner space.
Huh. That's not what I remember the inside of Martin Short looking like. Anyway, Zoltar shows Kara that he's stolen.
Borrowed it.
Borrowed the Omegahedron, the power source for their city, to use it to inspire his art and imbue the illusion of life into his creations. Kara uses Zoltar's tool to create a butterfly, while Zoltar gives Kara the Omegahedron to hold on to, which she uses on her butterfly, but her creation goes awry and busts a hole in their window, which seems to be made out of plastic, which pulls the Omegahedron out into space and nearly takes Kara with it, but she's saved, albeit temporarily, as Kara takes it upon herself to steal an unguarded pod to chase after it. Oh, and Zoltar insists that he has to be banished into the Phantom Zone because I personally think it's a bit of a dick move to subject your people to death and insist that you live forever in another dimension. Even if you have to endure eternal suffering, you're still alive. Anyway, the Omegahedron heads for Earth and lands nearby to Selina, played by Faye Dunaway, a witch with delusions of world domination, who was in a relationship with Nigel, a warlock who Selina drops like a bad habit once she gets the Omegahedron, which grants her powers and she takes back to her secret lair at an old amusement park, which frankly feels less evil witch and more discount Joker to me, and shows her new power source to her assistant Bianca, who is an utter ditz. Bear in mind that there is no reason that Selina should know what it is or how the Omegahedron works, because they sure as hell didn't really explain how it worked back in Argos City, so I don't even think the writers know. Kara arrives on Earth, where Superman has embarked on a peace-seeking mission to another galaxy because, like I said earlier, Christopher Reeve declined to appear, and she has a supersuit because In fairness, Clark just kind of found his suit in the first movie at the Fortress of Solitude, so I guess this actually tracks. Kara discovers her powers on Earth, such as strength, flight, and heat vision, and after an extended flying montage, which makes me think that this movie actually was directed by Robert Wise, because it reminded me of the Enterprise flybys from Star Trek The Motion Picture, Kara finally gets to work, using her bracelet to track down the Omegahedron somehow, but ends up in the middle of a city, which I think is meant to be Midvale, where of course she's nearly sexually assaulted, but Kara can take care of herself. Oh, gee, she hit that guy so hard she knocked him into the 24th century. And if you thought I was going to make the low-hanging Max Headroom reference, you don't know me very well. Mainly because if you knew me well, you'd know that I've never actually seen an episode of Max Headroom, so I don't have a joke I can use. But I do have a Max Headroom signal hijacking joke I can use. That's for interrupting Horror of Fang Rock. Selena throws a party to celebrate her good fortune and belittles Nigel, and when he starts cozying up to a pretty woman, Selena goes all Beetlejuice on her and tosses her around with her magic. Probably for the best, though. I saw her talking to some two-headed dude earlier, and I think she's probably going to go home with him instead of the Englishman. Kara sleeps in the woods, discovering that she's miraculously close to a girls' boarding school, and upon seeing them, Kara decides to disguise herself as a student, for some reason. Like, she doesn't have to, but I guess she was probably lonely on Earth, and since Clark wasn't around, she had to find someone to hang out with. What baffles me is the hair color change. So, like, in the comics, she wore a brown wig because her identity was thought up by Superman, who did it because he had a secret identity. Although I don't know if Kara knows that in the movie. Anyway, Kara enrolls herself in the school as Linda Lee, where Nigel miraculously teaches, because a movie is only as good as its most contrived plot points, and I guess, yeah, she does know Superman's identity because she uses Clark Kent as a reference and is roomed with Lucy Lane, played by Maureen Teefy, who you might remember from Grease 2. Kara attends classes, and Selena drives around and ends up spotting Ethan, a landscaper for the girls' school, and falls madly in love with him based on the Omegahedron's reaction, which was probably reacting to Kara's bracelet now that I think about it, and thus begins the plot. Selena attempts to woo Ethan, who is too dumb to live, while Kara attempts to juggle her new life as a schoolgirl with her search for the Omegahedron. Kara also uses her powers opportunistically, but unlike her cousin, who in the comics at the time typically used his powers to get back at Steve Lombard, Kara uses her powers to get back at sociopathic bullies who go after her and Lucy.
I want to see them suffer.
Seriously, those girls are monsters. The next major plot development is when Selena lures Ethan back to her lair and drugs him in order to use a love potion she created to force him to fall in love with her, but through shenanigans, including Nigel distracting Selena, Ethan wanders out into the city and has to be saved from being attacked by the construction equipment that Selena remotely brings to life by Supergirl, while she's eating Popeye's chicken with Jimmy Olsen, and Ethan falls in love with Linda instead. And Jimmy Olsen eating Popeyes might sound weird because you'd think he'd be more of a Burger King guy, but it actually makes a lot of roundabout sense because the Burger King near where I grew up is now a combination Burger King and Popeyes. I wonder if he gets an employee discount at both restaurants. Anyway, Selena thinks that Kara's interference was set up by Nigel and doesn't realize that Linda's Supergirl, so she thinks that it's intentional and sends a monster after what she believes is a normal teenager, like she thinks she's Rita Repulsa or something, but of course Kara manages to take it down as Supergirl, much to Selena's irritation. Selena unleashes more of the Omegahedron's power, which alerts Kara and allows her to track the location back to Selena's lair, but Ethan has tracked her down somehow, and he offers his love to her, even offering marriage to Kara's slight irritation, cause she's trying to stay on mission, but she's not entirely immune to resist his charms. Unfortunately, Selena finds them and attacks them, but Kara makes quick work of Selena's spells and saves Ethan once more. Selena knocks Ethan out with a coconut, perhaps trying to wipe his memory because she's seen too many episodes of Gilligan's Island, and on the suggestion of Bianca, enlists the help of Nigel to get rid of Supergirl, but Nigel instead breaks the love spell, although Ethan is still in love with Linda despite that. Although it's Supergirl who kisses Ethan before Selena, with Nigel's help, uses the Omegahedron to kidnap Ethan once more. But naturally, Selena betrays Nigel and steals his powerful wand to begin her takeover of the world. Or based on the fact that she sets up her evil mountain in the middle of Midvale, the Tri-State Area. Kara rushes in to defeat her, but Selina banishes Supergirl into the Phantom Zone, which I guess she knows about, and props to them for retaining the effect from the Superman movies. And after almost ending up like the horse from Neverending Story, Kara is saved by Zoltar, who is a Windex-drinking drunken wreck over the impending loss of Argo City and his failure to secure the Omegahedron, resigned to eternal suffering. I really hope there's some sort of time dilation, because otherwise he's been there upwards of maybe a week tops, and he has already gone Dark Night of the Soul. Kara intends to escape, though, and with Zoltar's help and his heroic, albeit seemingly unnecessary final sacrifice, she returns to Earth in time for her final battle with Selina, who has since taken over the city, inspiring protests from the girls' school, for some reason, causing Selina to arrest Lucy and Jimmy once she finds out their connection to Linda. I'm not going to do a play-by-play on the final battle because bar something I'm going to comment on later, I think it's actually pretty good. But of course, Supergirl prevails and she wins. Selina and Bianca are destroyed by their own magic, seemingly banished into the Phantom Zone. Ethan figures out that Linda and Supergirl are one and the same. Lucy and Jimmy get together, since that was a relationship apparently. And Supergirl goes to return the Omegahedron to Argo City, as while the film doesn't really have a proper ending, at least it mercifully ends. But I own the DVD, which has an extra 10 minutes of footage from the European theatrical cut, and let me just say, the fact that they managed to make a 2-hour movie even longer is utterly amazing. It apparently adds some context to some of the plot points, but I've already wasted 2 hours of my life already, and I don't want to waste any more of it. The American theatrical cut is what I'm gonna fix. Visually, the movie looks pretty good. Kara's suit is about on par with Christopher Reeve's, and I don't think anything looks particularly cheap. Well, except that invisible monster that Selina sent after Linda, but if Douglas Adams can put an invisible spaceship in Shada, I think I have to give Supergirl an invisible monster. And while the entire town of Midvale is a set, it's not super obvious that it is at first glance, and I probably wouldn't have noticed that if I hadn't been told. And I know I bash the flying scene for going on too long, but visually, it is a nice-looking scene. Even if that bit with the horses just makes me want to go rewatch The Man from Snowy River. And I know I bash the idea that it was directed by a TV director, but the directing is really solid, and I apologize to Swark for assuming otherwise. After all, TV is where Richard Donner got his start. Swark has a really interesting vision for the film, envisioning it as more of a fantasy film, which makes sense given the directing style. And the actors are really giving it their all. Helen Slater is a really good Kara, and the studio initially sought out Brooke Shields and Demi Moore, but I don't think that I'd like the film as much with either of them in the role. They're fine actresses, but I like that Supergirl is an unknown actress, because you don't watch the movie with any preconceived notions from her other roles. Well, unless you watch it nowadays when she's a known actress, but even still, only knowing her from Supergirl as Eliza Danvers, I liked her performance well enough, even despite the dull surprise look she has on most of the time. She's certainly putting in the effort, so I gotta give her credit for that. While it's not as impressive as Christopher Reeve standing up straight, there are some elements that differentiate Linda from Supergirl, which is why I blame the writing. As a villain, Faye Dunaway is sorely lacking, but again, not the fault of the actress. A villain is only as good as their script, and this script is not very good. Think of it like The Master on Doctor Who. When written properly, even the hammiest of them, Anthony Ainley and Eric Roberts in particular, can be incredibly sinister and impressive villains. Unfortunately, with bad writing, they end up like their reputations. As does Selina. The other characters are done well enough. Nigel, Bianca, Lucy Lane, Jimmy Olsen. None of them feel like their actors are phoning it in, which is always a plus. Hell, not even Peter O'Toole seems like he's bored with it, even though he would be justified to. And the premise that Selina, a magic user in what is ostensibly the DC universe, even if the movies of the time favored technology and alien physiology more than magic, uses a sufficiently advanced technological item to essentially bring her magic to life. It's a great premise. It's Clark's Law in action. It's not backed up by the text all that much, and I admit that I'm kind of reaching for this one, but I like the idea that based on Nigel's skill, magic exists, but the Omegahedron can supercharge it. It's an interesting angle to take, because like I said, Superman was facing off against alien generals and evil businessmen. It was about time that we got a magic villain in the films, especially since pre-Crisis, when the movie took place. Outside of kryptonite, Superman's biggest other vulnerability is magic. And as for Kara being trapped in the Phantom Zone and finding a key male figure from her childhood having become morose and emotionally drained, well, it seemed to be a much more solid premise when they used it for the first half of Season 6 of Supergirl, so I don't think it was a bad choice, although I wonder why Selina knows it's called the Phantom Zone. But yeah, there's a decent movie hiding in all the nonsense. This is, without a doubt, the most incomprehensible film that I have ever watched in my entire life. You'd think that with 3 Superman films under their belt, they'd have figured out the formula, but no. The story is utter nonsense. Nothing in the movie happens for any discernible reason. Zoltar banishes himself to the Phantom Zone for no reason. Heck, he steals the Omegahedron for no reason. And the Omegahedron is a completely different story, because we get no proper exposition to explain exactly what it is or how it does what it does. Is it a battery? Is it a telepathic replication device? Is it some sort of projector? Apparently nobody knows. I've heard that the script was cobbled together from various drafts, and it really feels like that. It's like they hired 3 writers, read their completely different scripts, fired them all, and then Frankenstein them together in a haphazard mess featuring details from all 3 scripts in a Cronenberg-esque abomination, which is why everything is so scattered with no justification for most of the scenes to exist. There's no reason for those bullies to be in the script except to cause minor conflict for a few scenes, but there's no real resolution outside of Kara defeating them pretty handily, and then they never cause problems again. There's not even a scene at the end where, like, they idolize Supergirl or show any remorse. And there's no reason for Supergirl to be wasting her time at the school in the first place, since her goal is locating the Omegahedron, and she drops that for like a full half hour before Selina shows up with it, but she doesn't even really bother with it until Ethan is attacked by the Killdozer. Listen, you heard me before, I can use my imagination to fill in the gaps. I don't need it spoon-fed to me, but can they at least put the food on the table and not make me walk all the way to the fridge? The only reason I was able to fill in the gaps is because I'm genre savvy. General audiences wouldn't make the leaps as easily. And Selina doesn't have any method to her madness either. Her motivations are so unclear. Like, okay, she wants to be a master sorceress, that's why she dated Nigel, but then she also wants the landscaper? Like, come on, movie, throw me a bone here, show her make a pass at Ethan before she decides that she wants him, and he calls her ma'am or something, which instigates her desire to become desirable to him because she's jealous. Actually, that just gave me a really great idea for the How to Fix It section. More later. And while that scene of the Killdozer going after Ethan and the wanton destruction of Midvale's business district is impressive and took almost a month to shoot on the Midvale set, it is way too long. Like, I care about Lois Lane, so if a scene of Superman saving Lois goes on too long, I'm invested. I don't care about Ethan because at this point he hasn't even met Kara yet. And I read the comic book adaptation of the movie to see if there was any extra context, and there was. And a lot of the scenes were completely changed in the comic. Like, Zoltar is banished to the Phantom Zone by Zor-El and Allura for stealing the Omegahedron, which seems like that should have made it in the movie. Like, did Peter O'Toole demand more lines or something? And then other scenes are made somewhat clearer, because as a comic it gives us more of Supergirl's internal monologue, so her dull surprise is punctuated by her actual thoughts. And it wisely removes the extended flying sequence, but it couldn't fix every problem. Like, Kara still spends way too much time at the school before remembering her mission, and she still changes back into Linda before waking Ethan up for no reason, and asks that Jimmy and Lucy not mention Supergirl for even less of a reason. So it's more of a script issue than anything else, and I'm not bashing the writer. According to an interview with Swark I read online, there was contention over what the movie was trying to be. Producers wanted a female version of the Superman movies, and Swark was going for more of a fantasy Wizard of Oz inspired idea of a girl discovering a strange new world and fighting against an evil witch, which obviously comes through on the screen, so a lot of the movie's issues are because it doesn't know what it wants to be. And we can forget that this movie came out pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths, since the 1978 Superman movie is relatively timeless. But even with the sillier moments of the Silver Age being fair game here, the movie utilizes nothing of Supergirl's various backstories. Obviously, they didn't ever post-Crisis origins, nor would I really want it to be a movie about Matrix, but her original backstory got tweaked here and there to flesh it out, which I covered a bit in my top 5 WTF moments in Supergirl's comics video. And in this, Argo City isn't destroyed, it's just under threat of it, even though Kara never really acts like it. She knows about Superman and Earth, except we have no idea why she knows about it, and even if she knew about Earth and Superman from radio or TV signals getting beamed into inner space somehow, how does she know about Clark Kent? That's not public knowledge. Not to mention that Kara never meets Superman, which is admittedly not a fault of the movie because they had no Christopher Reeve, and she doesn't even get adopted parents or the last name Danvers. As far as anyone knows, she's Linda Lee, and she has a principal named Danvers. The TV show might have thrown out most of her original origin, but at least she has logical reasons for knowing what she knows about Superman. I've often had the thought while watching the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie that perhaps they spent too much time on the backstory, with Krypton and Smallville and Clark's training at the Fortress, and maybe they should have just gotten to the Metropolis stuff a little earlier, but I didn't mean like this. And let's not ignore the fact that the bulk of the plot of the movie features the heroine and the villainess fighting over a man. In the first female-led superhero movie, mind you. I mean, okay, it's the second if you count Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, but I'm talking big 2 superhero property. Also, why is it that every time I talk about Supergirl, I end up mentioning Sheena, Queen of the Jungle? I don't even like Queen of Sheena the Jungle. You can see what Zwark was going for with the Wizard of Oz idea, with Kara stealing Ethan kinda being equivalent to the Ruby Slippers, and Selena being very obviously the Wicked Witch of the West, but it doesn't quite work because Kara's not a very proactive protagonist. Things happen to her more often than she drives the plot herself. I said the actors were all putting effort into the movie, but that does not mean that the characters were all written well. I said a bit before about how the writing let down Kara and Selena, not to mention Ethan, who is too dumb to live, and while his love for Linda makes sense because he was under a spell and thus it was supposed to be rushed, I don't know exactly when Kara fell for him, and it's not clear why. Then we have Bianca, the comic relief of the movie, and she seems to go back and forth on whether she's party to Selena's schemes or not, and while a lot of her dialogue is admittedly very funny, she's not that good as comic relief. Otis and Miss Tessmacher, she is not. As others have noted, the movie has no urgency. There's no ticking clock that most good superhero movies have. Superman has to stop Lex Luthor before he makes California fall into the ocean. The Avengers have to stop Thanos before he collects all the Infinity Stones. Supergirl has to stop Selena before she continues using the Omegahedron to fuel her magic. And she takes her sweet-ass time doing it, with a lot of time being devoted to the school plot, which might have made more sense if Superman was around, so Kara would have time to learn about Earth while Superman looked for the Omegahedron. But as it stands, she's got one mission, and she ignores it for about half the movie. And remember when I said we'd talk about the final battle later? It's later. So the battle, for the most part, isn't bad. Like I said, the effects are goofy, but it's from 1984, so I can look past it. What I can't look past is Supergirl getting tripped up when Selena makes the floor unstable. Supergirl, whose main power is flight. And you can't even argue that, like, she doesn't know she can fly or anything, so she's done it the entire movie, except now when it would have been the most useful. Not to mention that, like the rest of the film, the fight is pretty nonsensical, and I wasn't even super clear on what exactly Kara had done to Selena and Bianca to win until I was rewatching it to make this video. So I've really got my work cut out for me this week. First things first, we need like an opening crawl or a narration or archive footage from Superman detailing Krypton's destruction and the method by which Argo City was saved. Nothing major, just something quick like, long ago, the planet Krypton was destroyed, the only survivor being Kal-El, the infant son of Jor-El and Lara, who was sent in a rocket to Earth to become the hero known as Superman. Or so it was believed. However, unbeknownst to Jor-El and the Science Council, a group in Argo City was fast at work attempting to preserve Krypton. but they ran out of time and were only able to save their own city by shunting it into a parallel dimension known as inner space. It was there that the denizens of Argo City lived in peace until now. Then we start the movie, and it goes mostly the same, except that Zoltar's stealing of the Omegahedron wasn't because of him wanting to make art, it was his escape plan. As we saw in the movie, everyone tries to convince Zoltar to stay, and it's likely that they might not have allowed him to leave. Zor-El, in fact, believes that it's impossible, but what if Zoltar was forced to? Zoltar takes the Omegahedron and pretends it was stolen, tells everyone that he has to go out and find another power source to save them, and leaves in his pod, but that's a lie, because he'd have slipped the Omegahedron to Kara, and he would be in the wind. But things didn't work out that way. Kara's butterfly effect boxed the plan, and when Kara loses it in the movie proper, you can see that he already has things worked out on how to leave, and Kara pretty much just gets in the pod and turns it on, but he insists on being banished because he's not sure Kara will be able to do it, and he feels remorse for his hubris, realizing it doomed everyone except Kara. Then Kara goes to Earth, and Selina finds the Omegahedron. First off, I want the Omegahedron to be telepathic or something, and it tells her how it works. Even if we never hear it, just Selina having a conversation with it so her knowledge of how it works makes sense. Then we show her passing Ethan as she leaves Nigel, who had made some sort of comment about her age and her looks, and she asks if Ethan would like a lift, but he refuses and says, "No thanks, ma'am," which infuriates her, so her reasoning for wanting Ethan is based in her own vanity and not "the magic ball told me to like him." Then Kara comes to Earth, getting spotted by Ethan, and immediately heads for Metropolis, the movie having earlier explained that Argo City gets transmissions from outer space and had intercepted one about Superman, with Zor-El and Allura realizing that it's Kal-El because of the resemblance to Jor-El and the family crest on his chest. She seeks out Superman for help, adopting a human identity as Linda Lee because of stares she got when she first landed in costume, swapping out in an alley with a school uniform she finds on the clothesline, but finds out from Jimmy Olsen that Superman had left Earth for a mission, and offhandedly remarks about Clark being away, and when Kara slips up and calls Clark her cousin, having seen a picture and realized that they were the same person, Jimmy remarks about Lois Lane's sister Lucy in Midvale, which makes the bracelet light up. Realizing that Midvale is where the Omegahedron is, Kara cons her way into the girls' school so she'd have a base of operations. The school stuff now justified and going mostly the same, with Kara befriending Lucy Lane and dealing with the bullies, who target Linda for her immediate success in all academic tasks. And they're jealous. Have you ever watched Little Witch Academia? I think that Kara would work really well as an Akko-type character, being fascinated with Earth stuff, but also being a bit clumsy when it comes to human customs at school. I think it'd be a really cool way for Kara to be differentiated from Linda. Otherwise, Selina's plot stays mostly the same because I fixed her motivations, which clears things up. She wants Ethan because it symbolizes her youth, and although I haven't really been able to find a use for Bianca, so she's out in my version. And it goes pretty much the same until Kara saves Ethan from a shortened Killdozer scene, but doesn't change out of her costume. So he falls in love with Supergirl, having seen her before, which gives Selina a new goal, to destroy Supergirl. Kara also falls in love with Ethan based on how he treats Linda when she runs into him in her secret identity. Selina tries and fails to give herself Supergirl's powers because the Omegahedron isn't that strong, and after some back and forth with sending monsters to destroy Supergirl, as she saves Ethan, who is a damsel in distress, similar to how Lois Lane is always in danger, their first real face-to-face confrontation ends with Selina banishing Kara to the Phantom Zone and adopting her look in a sort of Little Mermaid Swan Princess twist, and goes after Ethan herself, although I imagine it looking like the Ronnie when she pretended to be Mel in Time of the Ronnie, but uses her powers to trick Ethan into seeing Supergirl. Meanwhile, in the Phantom Zone, Kara finds Zoltar, who at first believes she's a spirit meant to torment him for his hubris, and it wasn't clear in the film, but my version would make it clear that there's time dilation, so he's been in there for years from his perspective. But once she manages to convince him of her identity, he gets his spirit back. But then Kara's spirit is broken when she sees Ethan and Selina together when they see like a vision of outside the Phantom Zone. But Zoltar helps her get it back and helps her get to the escape route, left open by Selina's amateur use of the Omegahedron. Selina realizes they're escaping and sends a monster after them to pull them back and hold them from escape as the portal slowly closes, but Zoltar gives his life to push Kara through while fighting the monster. I feel like this makes more sense because he's doing an active thing instead of just sort of giving up. Then, in the final fight, I actually really liked what the comic did, where Selina created a manifestation of all her evil and sent it against Supergirl, so I want to reuse that here. And Supergirl's goodness manages to overpower Selina's evil for a bit as Selina tosses magic around haphazardly until the manifestation has Supergirl on the ropes. Ethan, who Selina had tied up when Supergirl showed up, tries to grab the Omegahedron to save Supergirl, but Selina knocks him back and tries to recast her spell to make Ethan see her as Supergirl, but Selina gains the advantage and knocks the manifestation into the path of the spell, making it see Selina as Supergirl and attack her, dragging her into the Phantom Zone and ending the threat. The movie ends with Ethan asking if Supergirl wants to try out the relationship outside the spell, since there was a part of him that did have a thing for her, but Supergirl sadly informs him that she has to return to Argo City, and she flies off, returning to Argo City with the Omegahedron and reuniting with her parents, but with a line that implies that Supergirl might return to Earth one day. Hey, it's not perfect, but at least it's coherent, right? And that was Supergirl, an utterly incomprehensible movie that had a lot of good elements thrown in, but none of them were used to their full potential. The acting was solid, the directing was pretty great, but the writing brought everything down because of the conflicting visions involved. Because honestly, if you squint, there is at least one half-decent movie hidden in there. In an age where we have a glut of superhero properties across movies and TV, it's certainly not the worst superhero movie ever, but it's definitely not one of the best. And even if you throw the movie a bone, like saying that maybe it's the best film of the 80s to feature a drunk Peter O'Toole, even that was done better in My Favorite Year in 1982.
This is for ladies only.
And so is this, Mom, but every now and again I have to run a little water through it.
But if you're a DC Comics fan and are desperate to watch a pre-crisis Supergirl movie, or you're just interested in seeing one of the first female superhero movies of all time, feel free to watch it, but don't say you weren't warned. When it comes to Supergirl, the TV show might not be perfect, but at least it usually makes sense. See you next time. And thus begins the plot. Selina attempts to woo Ethan, who is too dumb to live, while Kara attempts to juggle her new And thus begins the plot. In the first major female-led superhero movie, mind you. I mean, okay, the second if you count Queen of the Jungle.